Richtoving, past president of the New York Central System Historical Society and currently the editor of Central Headlight, the Society's quarterly magazine. In this premiere episode of the New York Central System Historical Society's Layout Video Tours, I'd like to show you my HO scale layout. My son Paul and I started working on this layout about 29 years ago. I did all the bench work, track work, and wiring, and Paul did about 2/3 of the scenery. The bench work is U-shaped, with overall dimensions of 23 by 23 feet and a nominal height of 50 inches. The Mainline is basically a 2-track folded dog bone. The layout represents various scenes along the east side of the Hudson River in the highlands of the Hudson, between Peekskill, New York, and Breakneck Ridge, just north of Cold Spring, New York. The railroad, of course, is New York Central's Hudson Division. The time period is the 1940s, although I push that sometimes if it pleases me. Although I welcome guests, this is not an operator's layout. It was primarily built for my own enjoyment. The view is always from the river, with timetable east to the viewer's right and timetable west to the left. Eastbound track 2, where this milk train is passing, is closest to the river, while westbound track 1 is closest to the background scenery. Construction started at this end of the layout near the west corner of the house, and we will follow it around to the most completed section at the east corner of the house. Trains to or from timetable east appear or disappear beneath this road overpass. This is a very abbreviated representation of the spur off track 1 at Camp Smith, a New York National Guard training ground just west of Ansville Creek. Trains then pass through a small cut and approach Little Tunnel. Little Tunnel is true to its name, probably less than 200 feet long. So we didn't have to employ much selective compression to be able to model it completely. New York State Route 9D follows the railroad through the highlands, mostly high above it. We provided glimpses of it here and there. One of these is here, where we used N-scale vehicles to provide and force the perspective. The higher you go, the more effective this is. And the top of the hill you see is 78 inches above the floor, just 10 inches below the upstairs floor joists. We are now looking at the west portal of Little Tunnel. Exiting, trains pass around a broad, sweeping curve before entering a short tangent, followed by a sharper curve to the left. All mainline curves on my layout are super elevated and spiraled. I can't say how much this improves appearance, as one by one the cars of a long train gradually turn in the degree of curvature and leave into the amount of super elevation. as we see with this L2A hauled freight train heading for Selkirk Yard. It's especially nice where there is an S-curve involved, such as right here. Needless to say, this is one of my favorite train watching spots. I used several brands of Code 83 Flex Track for my mains, spiked to 1/2 inch homosote that I milled with a router for the proper ballast contour. That was a very dusty job. My ballast and my riprap came from Arizona Rock and Mineral, specially mixed to match the colors of various pieces of the real thing that Paul and I picked up on a visit to the real railroad. Coming out of the left-hand curve, westbound trains approach our representation of Manitou, New York. Manitou has always been a favorite location to photograph trains, and I first discovered it in 1952, just early enough to take one photo of steam in action there. The 1917 valuation map shows that there were once 2 mile-long sidings here, one for each direction. By the 1940s, only part of the eastbound track remained used for setouts, and we included it here. A handful of cottages lined the water's edge. Paul modeled a family moving into this one, and his Schlepp Brothers moving van is from Dumont, New Jersey, my boyhood hometown. Don't I wish that we'd really moved to Manitou. West of the unprotected road crossing, Paul modeled the tiny shelter that replaced the original passenger station. On the hillside, beyond some wetlands, we included 4 Z-scale houses to hint at the distant presence of Route 9D. We also modeled in N-scale some decaying and overgrown structures of the Highland Chemical and Mining Company, an important industry here until its closing in 1913. Westbound trains leave Manitou through a cut and come into view again beneath this stone overpass, nicely modeled by Paul. An article about its construction appeared in the October 2000 issue of Model Railroader magazine. The prototype provides access to a fine Victorian mansion that for well over a century has been a landmark on the river, and Paul modeled it too. Of course, it and the grounds surrounding it are much larger, but we employed the modeler's favorite tool, selective compression, to be able to capture the essence of the scene. Right about here, on this hillside, adding scenery to the layout came to a grinding halt because Paul, having finished his formal education, moved away to begin his professional career. And I took about a decade-long leave of most modeling activities to play with a full-sized railroad. That concluded, I got back to work on the layout. Westbound trains enter a spacewalk here because this section of the layout is geographically out of place. It represents a section of the real Hudson Division that is east of Manitou. On a layout designed for prototypic operation, such a thing would be outrageous. As I said earlier, this is not an operator's layout. The accommodation was made so that the configuration of the benchwork might better fit the intended scene. I modeled this concrete retaining wall with lengths of stripwood. And I thought it looked pretty good until my youngest grandson, then barely able to see over the top of the benchwork, remarked, "What's that big piece of wood doing there?" Oh well. I ought to get high marks for my telegraph poles, however. They are Rick's products, but were modified to have the correct number of arms, each with the correct arrangement of insulators, according to 1940s photos in this area. Tall poles, representing those intended to carry the wires over the tracks, even sport double arms, true to prototype. High above and quite evident in this scene is the ever-present Route 9D, again modeled in N-scale. To add a little interest, I included a dry gulch, passing under the highway, descending down the hillside, and when running, emptying water into the river through a pipe beneath the right-of-way. During the 1940s, Central replaced many of its semaphore signals with color light signals. This gave me an excuse to include one remaining semaphore. Signal 4491 protects westbound movements before the curve into Bear Mountain Tunnel. It functions courtesy of a tortoise switch machine under the benchwork. And that brings us to the rock-hewn east portal of Bear Mountain Tunnel. Famous, of course, for the Bear Mountain Bridge that spans the Hudson high above it. To model even a hint of such a colossal structure so far out past my modeling skills that you will have to look in vain to find it on my layout. Drivers on my miniature Route 9D will have to find another way to get across the river. When a westbound train enters Bear Mountain Tunnel, it is actually entering the long curve that constitutes one end of the mainline dog bone. Tracks are then hidden from view on this end of the layout by a display cabinet, and the westbound reappears from the portal of what I call spurious tunnels. While typical of the rock-hewn tunnel portals along the Hudson Division, this portal does not represent any one of them. The rock cutting here is almost paper thin because one of the reverse loops that hide inside the ends of my dog bone is less than an inch behind it. Since a must-have model of Breakneck Ridge was planned for the far end of this section of the layout, it was necessary to include a 4-track main line. So upon exiting Spurious Tunnel, westbounds immediately encounter an interlocking that, greatly compressed, corresponds to that of Signal Station 43 on the Hudson Division, where the 4-tracking of the real main resumed. It is hoped that a proper model of SS-43 with all of its mechanical rodding will eventually replace this Atlas stand-in. Track numbers counted from the river are now 4, 2, 1, and 3. In the real world, Route 9D descends from the hills to the village of Cold Spring and then runs close to the tracks until passing through Breakneck Ridge in its own tunnel. I included the highway since its tunnel was another must-have, but had scant space to do this because of the reverse loop track and storage tracks that are behind the scene. The grade that this highway ascends is a bit stiff, because to disappear around a bend, it had to cross above an ascending loop track. A stone wall protects motorists from plunging to the track below, and two girls perched on the wall to enjoy a view of the Hudson hide a seam in the material that I used to make the wall. Those girls have been sitting there now for about 10 years and pay absolutely no attention to the many trains that pass by. Nothing says 4-track Hudson Division quite like these standard New York Central signal gantries, and I am grateful to Don Silberbauer at Model Memories for making them available. My self-designed signal system provides rudimentary operation. For detection, it employs tiny Hall effect switches embedded in the roadbed that are triggered on and off by equally tiny magnets mounted under my locomotives and under cars that are equipped with marker lights. It has been providing flawless viewing enjoyment for me for over 20 years. It was a real squeeze here, with trains passing on a hidden track not more than 2 inches away from the cop car. The cop and speeder scene helps to draw viewers' attention away from the absurdly vertical rock face. From the earliest stage of track planning, this broad 4-track curve was planned to provide a prime location for photographing my trains from the low-level perspective of an HO scale photographer. I even included 2 of them and their parked woody station wagon here. All of which brings us to Breakneck Ridge, with its highly recognizable concrete-faced twin bores. If ever there was an exercise in selective compression and selective elimination, it was here. The concrete portals and their spacings were measured and modeled to exact HO scale, but the apex of their arches is about 2 feet under scale, so that they would relate well to the rock cutting above. But while you will find the little square concrete retaining wall and the 3-poled 4-track telltale in the scene, you will not find the famous Breakneck Lodge nor the oft-photographed water tower. The ascending grade of Route 9D, leading to its own tunnel, was modeled in a scale that is about halfway between N and HO. Finally, if anything really makes the scene work by suggesting distance, it is the smaller than N scale twin telegraph poles poking up into the sky, just as they do in every photo of Breakneck Ridge that I have ever seen. Of course, there's much more to my layout, including 2 staging yards, a small switching yard, and a rudimentary engine terminal, but these are not included in this video. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this tour of my layout. If you enjoyed this layout video, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, and if you're a fan, researcher, or modeler of the NYC, would you consider joining the New York Central System Historical Society? I invite you to visit our website to see everything we're doing and what we have to offer. Member benefits include Central Headlight, our print magazine, New York Central Modeler, our online modeling magazine, annual conventions held at former New York Central locations, New York Central System Historical Society archives at our headquarters in Ohio, online store, books, archive DVDs, apparel, memorabilia, and scale models. Members enjoy a 20% discount on many store items. Come and take a look. Great new things are happening at the New York Central System Historical Society.